Good morning, and welcome to our lecture on power, ethics, and reputation in Canadian negotiations. Canada's multicultural society, with 22% visible minorities, and federal system create a unique negotiation landscape where power dynamics, ethical considerations, and reputation shape outcomes. Today, we'll explore how these elements manifest in federal-provincial talks, Indigenous land claims, and international trade, drawing on frameworks like BATNA and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Our goal is to equip you with strategies to navigate Canada's complex business and governmental contexts, ensuring equitable and sustainable agreements. Power asymmetries, like those in Indigenous negotiations, require cultural sensitivity, while ethical practices, guided by legal frameworks, build trust. Reputation, critical in Canada's collaborative culture, impacts long-term relationships, as seen in resource sector deals. We'll analyze case studies, like labor negotiations and trade agreements, to understand these dynamics. Canada's bilingual and diverse environment, per the Multiculturalism Act, demands adaptive strategies. By the end, you'll master balancing power, ethics, and reputation to achieve successful outcomes in Canada's unique landscape. Let's begin by examining power structures in Canadian negotiations. Let's explore power dynamics in Canadian negotiations, per Smith, 2020. Canada's federal system creates complex power structures, with federal authority often clashing with provincial autonomy, as in healthcare funding talks. Provincial governments, like Quebec, leverage autonomy to assert influence, creating negotiation challenges. Indigenous sovereignty negotiations, rooted in historical treaties, introduce unique power imbalances, requiring cultural sensitivity, as in land claim talks, per Lee, 2018. Corporate influence in policy making, particularly in resource sectors like Alberta's oil industry, shapes outcomes through economic leverage. Labor unions wield significant bargaining power, as in the 2020 Canada Post dispute, balancing worker rights with business needs. Canada's multicultural society, with 20% foreign-born residents, demands negotiators adapt to diverse cultural norms, per the Multiculturalism Act. The BATNA concept is critical in Canada's resource-based economy, where international markets offer alternatives. Ethical considerations, guided by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, set boundaries. For students, understanding these dynamics is key. Consider a healthcare negotiation in Ontario. Balancing federal and provincial power ensures equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's collaborative ethos. Challenges include jurisdictional disputes, but ethical frameworks mitigate risks. As we transition, we'll examine power vantage points, exploring their role in Canada. Continuing our discussion, let's examine power vantage points in Canadian negotiations, per Smith, 2020. Potential power stems from resource dependencies, like Alberta's oil reserves in trade talks, giving economic leverage. Perceived power arises from cultural biases, such as Quebec's linguistic identity influencing perceptions, requiring sensitivity, per the Multiculturalism Act. Power tactics leverage legal frameworks, like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to set negotiation boundaries, as in labor disputes. Realized power manifests in policy outcomes, such as environmental regulations from corporate NGO talks. Long-term power relationships, built through consistent ethical behavior, are critical in Canada's collaborative culture, as in Indigenous negotiations, per Lee, 2018. Canada's diverse society, with 22% visible minorities, amplifies the need for culturally adaptive tactics. The BATNA concept strengthens leverage, especially in international markets. For students, mastering these vantage points is essential. Consider a resource negotiation in British Columbia. Leveraging legal frameworks and building long-term relationships ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's ethical ethos. Challenges include cultural misperceptions, but transparency mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore sources of power, examining their application in Canada. Following power vantage points, let's explore sources of power in Canadian negotiations, per Johnson, 2019. Information control, like withholding or sharing data strategically, shapes outcomes, as in federal-provincial budget talks. Expertise and resource extraction, such as technical knowledge in Alberta's oil sector, grants significant leverage. Positional authority, like governmental roles in policy negotiations, establishes influence, critical in Canada's federal system. Relationship networks, built through community engagement, enhance power, as in Indigenous land claims, per Lee, 2018. Alternative options, or BATNAs, are vital in Canada's resource-based economy, offering international market leverage. Legitimacy through legal standing, per the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, ensures ethical power use, as in environmental negotiations. Canada's multicultural society, with bilingual and diverse norms, requires culturally sensitive power application. For students, understanding these sources is key. Consider a negotiation in Quebec's energy sector. Leveraging expertise and legal legitimacy ensures equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's collaborative ethos. Challenges include information asymmetries, but transparency mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll examine ethical considerations, exploring their role in Canadian negotiations. Building on power sources, let's examine ethical considerations in Canadian negotiations, per Johnson, 2019. Adhering to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms ensures legal and ethical boundaries, critical in labor disputes. Ensuring transparency and fairness, like open data sharing in public sector talks, builds trust, aligning with Canada's collaborative ethos. Respecting cultural diversity, with 22% visible minorities, requires sensitivity to Indigenous and bilingual norms, as in land claim negotiations, per Lee, 2018. Balancing power asymmetries, like those in Indigenous talks, promotes fairness, reflecting the Multiculturalism Act. Promoting equitable outcomes ensures long-term trust, vital in Canada's resource sector. Aligning with legal frameworks, such as environmental laws, guides ethical conduct. For students, mastering ethics is essential. Consider a healthcare negotiation in Manitoba. Transparency and cultural respect ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's inclusive culture. Challenges include balancing transparency with strategic needs, but legal frameworks mitigate risks. As we transition, we'll explore reputation management, examining its impact in Canada. Following ethical considerations, let's explore reputation management in Canadian negotiations, per Brown, 2021. Building trust through consistent ethical behavior, like honoring agreements in Indigenous talks, enhances credibility, per Lee, 2018. Engaging with community stakeholders, such as NGOs in environmental negotiations, strengthens reputation, critical in Canada's resource sector. Maintaining transparency in public sector talks, like federal-provincial budget negotiations, builds public trust, aligning with the Canadian Institute for Negotiation, 2022. Leveraging cultural sensitivity, respecting diverse norms, ensures inclusivity, per the Multiculturalism Act. Fostering long-term relationships, through ongoing engagement, secures partnerships, as in trade talks. Enhancing social license to operate, vital for corporate reputation, reflects Canada's collaborative ethos. For students, mastering reputation management is key. Consider a resource negotiation in Alberta. Community engagement and transparency ensure trust, reflecting Canada's inclusive culture. Challenges include public scrutiny, but ethical consistency mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore federal-provincial power dynamics, examining their negotiation impact. Continuing our discussion, let's examine federal-provincial power dynamics in Canadian negotiations, per Smith, 2020. Balancing federal authority with provincial autonomy is critical, as in healthcare funding talks where provinces like Quebec assert jurisdiction. Navigating jurisdictional disputes, like environmental regulations, requires diplomatic strategies, per the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Leveraging constitutional frameworks ensures legal legitimacy, guiding negotiations. Ensuring collaborative outcomes, through consensus building, reflects Canada's cooperative ethos. Respecting regional economic disparities, like Atlantic Canada's reliance on fisheries, fosters fairness. Aligning with public interest, such as affordable healthcare, builds trust, per the Canadian Institute for Negotiation, 2022. Canada's federal system, with diverse regional needs, demands adaptive strategies. For students, mastering these dynamics is essential. Consider a negotiation in Ontario. Balancing federal and provincial interests ensures equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's collaborative culture. Challenges include jurisdictional tensions, but constitutional frameworks mitigate risks. As we transition, we'll explore Indigenous sovereignty negotiations, examining their unique dynamics. Following federal-provincial dynamics, let's explore Indigenous sovereignty negotiations in Canada, per Lee, 2018. Acknowledging historical treaties, like the numbered treaties, establishes legitimacy, critical in land claim talks. Respecting Indigenous protocols, such as ceremonial openings, fosters trust, aligning with the 7 generations principle. Addressing power imbalances, due to historical injustices, requires ethical approaches, per the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Incorporating long-term perspectives, unlike short-term corporate goals, ensures sustainability, as in resource negotiations. Ensuring cultural sensitivity, with 22% visible minorities, aligns with the Multiculturalism Act. Aligning with reconciliation goals builds trust, vital for Canada's collaborative ethos. For students, mastering Indigenous negotiations is key. Consider a negotiation in British Columbia. Respecting protocols and addressing history ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's reconciliation commitment. Challenges include mistrust, but ethical engagement mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore corporate NGO negotiations, examining their dynamics in Canada. Building on Indigenous negotiations, let's examine corporate NGO negotiations in Canada, per Brown, 2021. Balancing economic and environmental goals, as in pipeline talks, requires compromise, like the 2019 Trans Mountain consultations. Engaging diverse stakeholders, including environmental groups and Indigenous communities, ensures inclusivity, per the Multiculturalism Act. Leveraging transparency, like sharing environmental impact data, builds trust, critical in Canada's resource sector. Addressing ethical responsibilities, per Johnson, 2019, ensures sustainable practices. Enhancing social license to operate strengthens corporate reputation, vital for public support. Fostering collaborative solutions, through joint committees, reflects Canada's cooperative ethos. For students, mastering these negotiations is essential. Consider a mining negotiation in Northern Ontario. Transparency and stakeholder engagement ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's ethical culture. Challenges include conflicting priorities, but collaborative approaches mitigate risks. As we transition, we'll explore managing power asymmetries, examining practical strategies in Canada. Following corporate NGO negotiations, let's explore managing power asymmetries in Canadian negotiations, per Smith, 2020. Identifying power imbalances, like those in Indigenous or labor talks, allows targeted strategies. Using neutral mediators, as in a 2020 Canada Post dispute, ensures fairness, per the Canadian Institute for Negotiation, 2022. Leveraging BATNA strategically, like international market options in trade talks, strengthens positions. Fostering transparent communication, sharing data openly, builds trust, critical in Canada's multicultural society. Ensuring equitable agreements, balancing power dynamics, reflects the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Aligning with ethical frameworks, like environmental laws, guides conduct. For students, mastering asymmetry management is key. Consider a negotiation in Alberta's oil sector. Mediation and transparency ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's collaborative ethos. Challenges include entrenched power structures, but ethical strategies mitigate risks. As we transition, we'll explore cultural sensitivity in negotiations, examining its role in Canada. Continuing our discussion, let's examine cultural sensitivity in Canadian negotiations, per Lee, 2018. Respecting bilingual norms, like French-English dynamics in Quebec, fosters trust, critical in federal-provincial talks. Adapting to Indigenous protocols, such as storytelling in land claims, ensures respect, aligning with reconciliation goals. Acknowledging regional disparities, like Atlantic Canada's community focus, tailors strategies, per Brown, 2021. Building trust through inclusivity, engaging diverse stakeholders, reflects Canada's 22% visible minority population. Ensuring equitable representation, like including Indigenous voices, aligns with the Multiculturalism Act. Canada's collaborative ethos demands cultural sensitivity for effective outcomes. For students, mastering this is essential. Consider a negotiation in Montreal. Respecting bilingual and Indigenous norms ensures equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's inclusive culture. Challenges include cultural misunderstandings, but inclusivity mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore Case Study 1, the International Trade Agreement, applying these concepts. Let's apply our concepts to a case study on an international trade agreement, per Smith, 2020. The issue involved tariff disagreements with trading partners, requiring diplomatic negotiations to balance economic and cultural interests, like protecting Canada's cultural industries. Actions included sector-specific compromises, leveraging BATNA with alternative markets, and transparent communication to build trust. Cultural sensitivity, respecting Canada's bilingual and multicultural identity, ensured inclusivity, per the Multiculturalism Act. The outcome was a bilateral agreement with cultural protections, strengthening trade while preserving identity. Ethical considerations, per the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, guided conduct, enhancing Canada's reputation. Challenges included power asymmetries and competing interests, but diplomatic strategies mitigated risks. For students, this case highlights power and ethics. Consider a similar negotiation in Ontario's agriculture sector. Transparency and cultural sensitivity ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's collaborative ethos. As we transition, we'll explore the labor union contract negotiation case, examining its dynamics. Following the trade agreement, let's examine the labor union contract negotiation case, per Johnson, 2019. The issue involved wage disputes and working conditions, as in the 2020 Canada Post negotiation, engaging unions and management. Actions included interest-based bargaining, focusing on mutual interests like worker welfare and business sustainability, facilitated by a neutral third party. Transparent communication and cultural sensitivity, respecting diverse worker backgrounds, built trust, per the Canadian Institute for Negotiation, 2022. The outcome was a comprehensive contract with productivity incentives, balancing power dynamics. Ethical conduct, per the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, enhanced reputation. Challenges included power imbalances and public scrutiny, but facilitation mitigated risks. For students, this case underscores ethical bargaining. Consider a similar negotiation in British Columbia's education sector. Interest-based approaches and transparency ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's collaborative ethos. As we transition, we'll explore a healthcare negotiation case, examining federal-provincial dynamics. Continuing with case studies, let's explore a healthcare negotiation case in Canada, per Smith, 2020. The issue involved federal-provincial funding disputes, like those over the Canada Health Transfer, requiring balance between federal authority and provincial autonomy. Actions included collaborative negotiations, with transparent data sharing on healthcare needs, fostering trust. Cultural sensitivity, respecting regional disparities like rural access in Atlantic Canada, ensured inclusivity, per the Multiculturalism Act. The outcome was an equitable funding agreement, aligning with public interest, per the Canadian Institute for Negotiation, 2022. Transparency enhanced reputation, while ethical conduct, per the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, guided negotiations. Challenges included jurisdictional tensions, but collaboration mitigated risks. For students, this case highlights federal-provincial dynamics. Consider a similar negotiation in Manitoba. Data-driven collaboration ensures equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's cooperative culture. As we transition, we'll explore a corporate NGO case, examining environmental ethics. Following healthcare, let's examine a corporate NGO negotiation case in Canada's resource sector, per Brown, 2021. The issue involved the environmental impact of a resource project, like a pipeline, engaging corporations and environmental NGOs. Actions included stakeholder engagement, with transparent environmental data sharing, building trust. Cultural sensitivity, including Indigenous perspectives, ensured inclusivity, per Lee, 2018. The outcome was a sustainable development agreement, balancing economic and environmental goals, enhancing corporate social license. Ethical practices, per Johnson, 2019, strengthened reputation, aligning with Canada's environmental laws. Challenges included conflicting priorities, but transparency mitigated risks. For students, this case underscores ethical reputation management. Consider a similar negotiation in Alberta. Stakeholder engagement and ethical practices ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's collaborative ethos. As we transition, we'll review our references, providing resources for mastering these concepts. To conclude, let's review the references informing our exploration of power, ethics, and reputation in Canadian negotiations. Smith, 2020, in Power Dynamics in Canadian Federalism provides insights into federal-provincial negotiations, critical for understanding power structures. Johnson, 2019, in Ethics in Canadian Business Negotiations offers ethical frameworks for resource and Indigenous talks. Brown, 2021, in Reputation Management in Multicultural Organizations explores reputation building in diverse settings. The Canadian Institute for Negotiation, 2022, in Best Practices provides practical guidance for public sector ethics. Lee, 2018, in Indigenous Negotiations in Canada highlights cultural protocols in sovereignty talks. For students, these sources offer a foundation for navigating Canada's complex landscape. Explore them to master power dynamics, ethical conduct, and reputation management. Consider a negotiation in Ontario's energy sector. transparency and cultural sensitivity ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's inclusive ethos. Thank you for your attention.